The rain falls softly against the tall windows of the Prime Minister's office. Outside, London hums faintly beneath a heavy, gray sky. Inside, the Prime Minister sits alone, his papers spread before him, but his mind elsewhere. It has been a difficult week, full of problems that seem unsolvable. Floods in the West Country, mysterious accidents, and reports of something strange, something he cannot quite explain. He stares out into the night, when suddenly, the portrait on the wall behind him coughs. The Prime Minister freezes. Slowly, the sky above London was heavy and gray, pressing low over the city as rain streaked the tall windows of the Prime Minister's office, where a man sat alone behind his desk, staring at papers he could no longer concentrate on, haunted by a growing sense that the world was sliding quietly out of his control. He rubbed his temples, thinking of the week's disasters. Floods in the West Country, a freak hurricane in the Southwest, unexplained collapses of bridges and tunnels, and a series of mysterious murders that no one in his government could explain. Every report brought a new crisis, and though his advisors spoke of weather patterns and terrorist threats, the Prime Minister had begun to suspect something far stranger, something that moved beneath the surface of ordinary life. He sighed, staring into the dark window that reflected his tired face. And then, from behind him, came a small, polite cough. The Prime Minister froze. The cough came again. Slowly, he turned toward the portrait. The one he had long assumed was just an old painting of a rather unremarkable man in a brown suit. But the painted man was now standing upright inside his frame, watching him with an air of quiet urgency. "Good evening," said the portrait, in a voice that seemed to echo slightly, as though coming from a great distance. The Prime Minister opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the portrait added, "The Minister of Magic will be arriving shortly." The words struck him like a blow, and he barely had time to process them before a swirl of green fire burst to life in the fireplace. Out of the flames stepped Cornelius Fudge, rotund and slightly disheveled, wearing a bowler hat and an anxious expression. Good evening," Fudge said, brushing soot from his sleeve, as if nothing were amiss. "I'm terribly sorry to intrude, but I'm afraid we have a few pressing matters to discuss." The Prime Minister sank back into his chair, feeling that familiar wave of disbelief that always came when this strange man appeared in his office. It wasn't the first time. Over the years, Fudge had shown up unexpectedly to explain minor magical disturbances that had, in truth, been the cause of half the crisis the Prime Minister had faced. But tonight, Fudge looked different. Older, more careworn. His eyes shadowed with worry. "You've had a rough week, I expect." Fudge began, his tone brisk but uneasy. "Those accidents, those incidents. I'm afraid our world has had a hand in them." The Prime Minister frowned. "Your world?" Fudge nodded gravely. "The wizarding world. I'd hoped we could contain it, but—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Lord Voldemort has returned." The room seemed to grow colder. Though the Prime Minister did not fully understand the name, he could feel the dread that came with it, as though the air itself recoiled from the words. Fudge went on, explaining in hurried tones that there had been murders, disappearances, and attacks. Not random, but deliberate, targeted, spreading fear across both their worlds. "It's been chaos," Fudge admitted, removing his hat and wringing it in his hands. "I did everything I could, of course, but—" He trailed off, looking at the Prime Minister with a defeated expression. "But I've been replaced." The Prime Minister blinked. "Replaced?" Before Fudge could answer, the portrait coughed again. "His here," it said solemnly. Another flare of green flame erupted in the fireplace, and a tall, leonine man stepped out. His hair streaked with gray and his eyes sharp behind half moon spectacles. Rufus Scrimgeour, the new Minister of Magic. He carried himself like a soldier, confident, composed, but clearly wary of the Prime Minister's office, as though it were enemy territory. "Good evening," Scrimgeour said curtly. "Sorry to burst in like this. I'll keep it brief." He glanced around the room, assessing every corner before fixing his gaze on the Prime Minister. "You've no doubt noticed certain disturbances lately. Our world's problems are bleeding into yours. We're doing what we can to contain them." "Contain?" the Prime Minister repeated, incredulous. "People have died! Bridges collapsing. Murders. Disappearances. And you call that containment?" Scrimgeour's expression did not change. "We're at war, Prime Minister. And in war, there are casualties." The words chilled the air between them. Fudge stood awkwardly to one side, his hat clutched in his hands, clearly uncomfortable with his successor's bluntness. Scrimgeour continued, explaining how Voldemort's followers, Death Eaters, he called them, had grown in number and boldness, striking both wizards and muggles alike. "We're reinforcing the magical barriers around key locations," Scringer said. But some of your people may still be caught in the crossfire. Accidents will happen. The Prime Minister stared at him. And what am I supposed to tell the public? Scrimger gave a thin smile. Whatever you usually tell them. There was a long silence. The only sound was the rain against the window and the faint crackle of the fire. For the first time, the Prime Minister realized how little he understood of the world that brushed so close to his own. A hidden war, fought in shadows while his government. Their explanations. That would never fit. Well, keep in touch, Scrimgeour said finally, turning toward the fire. You'll be alerted if there's something you must know. He paused, then added, keep your doors locked. Even our world isn't as safe as it once was. And with that, he stepped into the green flames and vanished. Fudge gave the Prime Minister a helpless shrug before following him, leaving behind only the fading smell of smoke and something faintly metallic in the air. The office was silent again. The Prime Minister sat motionless, staring at the empty fireplace, unsure whether to believe what he had just witnessed, or to convince himself it was a dream, brought on by exhaustion. But then, the portrait spoke softly. Dark times, sir. Best keep your wits about you. The Prime Minister looked up, his throat dry. Tell me something, he said quietly. This Lord Voldemort. He's real. Then, the painted man's expression grew grim. As real as the rain on your windows, sir. And far more dangerous. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, deep and distant. Somewhere, in the endless sprawl of London, shadows were moving. Unseen by most, but very real to those who knew where to look. And far from the Prime Minister's office, in a quiet suburban street, a boy named Harry Potter lay sleeping, unaware that his destiny had already begun to turn. Once more, the darkness was rising, and soon, every world, magical and ordinary, would feel its reach. The sun was setting over the little village of Little Hangleton, painting the rolling hills in long streaks of gold and purple. But inside the old, decaying Riddle house, the air was cold and heavy, thick with the scent of dust and age, as though the place itself resented the life that now stirred within it. For years, the house had stood empty. The villagers avoided it, whispering about the mysterious murders that had happened there decades ago, when the entire Riddle family was found dead, their faces frozen in terror, and no cause ever discovered. But tonight, there was light again in one of the upstairs windows, flickering like a pale flame behind the grimy glass. A tall figure moved inside, robed and silent, gliding across the room with a snake, like grace. Lord Voldemort stood before the fire, his face pale and inhuman, his red eyes glowing like embers as they flicked toward the man kneeling before him. The man was thin and sallow, his greasy hair falling over his face. Severus Snape, his black cloak pooling on the dusty floor, his voice low and measured as he spoke. They suspect nothing, my lord. Dumbledore continues to trust me completely. Voldemort's mouth curved into something like a smile, though it contained no warmth, only cold amusement. You have done well, Severus, he hissed softly, his voice high and chilling. And the boy. Snape's eyes flickered. He grows stronger, but he is still guided by his emotions. Reckless, impulsive. Dumbledore trains him, though he does not reveal for what purpose. Voldemort's expression darkened. For what purpose indeed? He whispered. The old fool thinks he can control destiny. He will learn otherwise. In the shadowed corner of the room, another figure stirred, smaller, trembling, his voice quivering as he spoke. My lord, if I may speak. It was Wormtail, once known as Peter Pettigrew, his silver hand glinting faintly in the firelight as he bowed so low his nose touched the floor. Voldemort did not look at him. You may speak, Wormtail, he said in a tone that promised pain should the words displease him. My lord, the preparations are nearly complete. The house is secure. And the boy Draco. Draco. Voldemort interrupted softly, his red eyes gleaming. Yes. The Malfoys owe me much. Do they not? Snape inclined his head. They are loyal, my lord. Though frightened. Voldemort's thin fingers curled around the arm of the chair. Fear is useful. It sharpens the mind. Young Draco must learn what loyalty truly means. For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint hiss of Nagini as she slithered across the floor, her scales gleaming in the dim light. Voldemort's gaze followed her, his expression distant, thoughtful. I have great plans, Severus, he said softly. The ministry falters, the Muggles live in ignorance, and Dumbledore grows weaker by the day. The boy will not be protected forever. When the time comes, he will face me. And when he does, he will die. Snape bowed his head, though his face remained unreadable. As you command, my lord. Voldemort studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly again, the expression twisting his pale face into something almost serpentine. You are loyal, Severus. I value that. But there are those who still doubt you. Snape said simply, I have earned their mistrust. And your trust. Voldemort's eyes glowed brighter, as though amused by the audacity of the reply. Indeed you have, he murmured. And you will prove it again. You will watch the boy. You will ensure that Draco fulfills his task. Should he fail? His voice trailed off, the silence completing the threat more clearly than words ever could. I understand, Snape said quietly. Good. Voldemort hissed. You may go. Snape rose gracefully, his cloak swirling as he turned to leave, pausing only to glance briefly at Wormtail, who cowered in the corner. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. One filled with silent contempt, the other with fear. And then Snape swept from the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall, before the front door creaked open and closed behind him. Outside, the night had deepened, and a pale mist was rising from the valley. Snape moved quickly down the overgrown path, his wand drawn, his expression unreadable, as he disappeared into the darkness. Back inside the house, Voldemort sat very still, his long white fingers tapping the armrest of the chair. Come, Nagini, he whispered, his eyes gleaming. We must speak with our friends. The great snake raised her head and slid silently toward him, her body coiling beside the chair as Voldemort turned his gaze to the fire. The time draws near, he said softly, almost to himself. Soon, the old order will fall. Soon, the boy who lived will live no longer. Afar away. What? Miles from the cold menace of the Riddle House. The evening air in another small village carried the faint hum of crickets and the scent of freshly cut grass. The burrow stood warm and crooked against the twilight, its mismatched windows glowing with candlelight. Inside, laughter spilled from the kitchen as Molly Weasley stirred a pot of stew, calling over the noise for Fred and George to stop testing whatever new invention they were working on. Mum, it's perfectly safe, Fred shouted, ducking as a puff of purple smoke exploded near the fireplace. Safe, Molly repeated, brandishing her spoon like a sword. You'll blow the roof off before dinner. Ron and Ginny were sitting at the table, trying to hide their laughter, while Arthur Weasley sat nearby, polishing a strange silver device that looked suspiciously muggle. Arthur, put that away, Molly said sharply. You'll have time for your toys after we eat. Arthur smiled sheepishly. Just a simple modification, dear. Nothing dangerous. The warmth and chaos of the burrow felt like another world entirely. one untouched by darkness, though in each of their minds lingered a quiet awareness of the danger beyond their walls. Upstairs, in the room Ron shared with Harry, an owl tapped against the window. Harry opened it quickly, and Hedwig soared in, dropping a letter on his bed. It was from Dumbledore. His heart quickened as he read the words. A brief note, written in Dumbledore's elegant hand, saying only that he would come for Harry at 11 o'clock the following night, and that he should be ready. Harry looked out into the fading sunset, his reflection framed by the golden light. Somewhere, beyond the fields and the winding roads, he knew Voldemort was waiting, planning. The scar on his forehead gave a faint, familiar twinge. He pressed his fingers to it, not in pain, but in certainty. The war that had been whispered about was now real, and he was in the center of it. The boy who had once been just a student was now something more. A soldier in a hidden battle. He closed the window, turned back to the room that already felt too small for the future ahead, and whispered to himself, "I'm ready." The next evening fell warm and clear over Privet Drive, where number 4 stood neat and ordinary as ever. Its trimmed hedges and shining windows, giving no hint of the world that waited beyond its quiet walls, and inside, Harry Potter was pacing his small bedroom, his packed trunk resting at the foot of his bed. Hedwig, watching him from her cage, with a kind of patient understanding only an owl could give. Every minute seemed to stretch longer than the last as he waited for Dumbledore's promised arrival, his heart beating with a mix of anticipation and unease. Downstairs, the Dursleys were gathered in the living room, pretending not to know that tonight would mark Harry's final evening under their roof, and secretly hoping that once he left, he would never return. Harry glanced at the clock. 5 minutes to 11. He checked the window again, wondering whether Dumbledore would arrive by broom, or perhaps by some other magical means. He didn't have long to wonder. A soft crack split the air, and a tall, thin figure appeared on the pavement outside, his silver hair glinting faintly under the streetlight. Dumbledore raised his hand, and the doorbell chimed. Harry hurried downstairs, his wand in hand, opening the door before his aunt or uncle could interfere. "Good evening, Harry," Dumbledore said warmly, his blue eyes twinkling behind his half-moon spectacles. "I trust you are ready." Harry nodded, though the sight of Dumbledore, standing there in his long midnight blue robes on a Muggle doorstep, made him want to laugh. Behind him, Uncle Vernon appeared in the hallway, his face turning purple at the sight. "Who are you?" he barked. "What's this nonsense?" Dumbledore inclined his head politely. "Ah, Mr. Dursley, how very pleasant to see you again. I believe we met many years ago." Vernon opened his mouth. But Dumbledore simply lifted a hand, and a calm hush seemed to fill the air, silencing any protest before it could begin. "No need to worry," Dumbledore said pleasantly. "Harry will be quite safe with me tonight. You may rest easy." And with that, he turned back to Harry. "Bring your things, my boy. We have a long journey ahead." Within minutes, Harry had his trunk, Hedwig's cage, and his wand. The Dursleys stood frozen as he passed. Aunt Petunia pale and tight-lipped, Dudley hiding half behind her, as though afraid Dumbledore might turn him into something unpleasant. "Goodbye," Harry said shortly. And before they could answer, Dumbledore gave a gentle wave of his hand. The front door closed behind them with a soft thud, and in the next instant, the two vanished into the night with a faint pop. They reappeared on a narrow, moonlit lane bordered by dark hedgerows and distant trees. The air smelled of grass and earth, and somewhere nearby, an owl hooted. "Where are we?" Harry asked, shifting his trunk. "A small village not far from here," Dumbledore said, walking forward with surprising swiftness for his age. "We are paying a visit to an old friend of mine." "And you, Harry, are about to learn something rather important." As they walked, Harry studied Dumbledore's face in the silvery light. There was something more serious in his expression than usual, something that made Harry feel this was not just a friendly call. "Sir," he said after a moment, "what is this about? Is it to do with Voldemort?" Dumbledore glanced at him, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Everything we do now, Harry, is to do with Voldemort. But tonight, we begin preparing you for the future. And to do that, we must first speak to Horace Slughorn." They reached a small, ivy-covered cottage, standing alone at the edge of the lane. The gate creaked as Dumbledore opened it, and he motioned for Harry to follow. The curtains were drawn, the windows dark. Dumbledore raised his wand, and with a flick, the front door swung open silently. Inside, the sitting room was a ruin. Furniture overturned, a smashed lamp on the floor, scorch marks on the wall. "Oh no," Harry whispered. Dumbledore didn't look alarmed. He stepped carefully over the broken glass, his wand raised high. "Horace," he said calmly, "I do wish you would not make such a mess." There was a soft pop, and suddenly, the armchair in the corner shifted. A plump, balding man appeared, his round face pink and sheepish, his dressing gown patterned with tiny stars. "Ah, Albus," he said, forcing a laugh. "You always were too clever by half." Dumbledore smiled. "Indeed, but your disguises remain impressive. May I introduce Harry Potter?" Slughorn turned, his small eyes widening with recognition. "Harry Potter," he breathed, his tone both curious and calculating. "The boy who lived. My. They sat down together. After Dumbledore restored the room to order, with a flick of his wand, Slughorn poured himself a generous glass of mead, his hands trembling slightly. "So, you've come to recruit me," he said. "I had a feeling you might. You've been headmaster too long, Albus, not to have some scheme in mind." Dumbledore's smile deepened. "You know me too well, Horace. Hogwarts needs you again. Potions, perhaps. You were the best." Slughorn hesitated, sipping his drink. "Times are dark, Albus. The Death Eaters are recruiting, and I've no wish to end up on either side. I'm too old for that sort of excitement." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled, though there was steel behind them. "I understand. But consider this. What better protection than Hogwarts walls? And what better company than young, talented students eager to impress?" Slughorn looked thoughtful, then glanced at Harry. "You're a Slytherin's dream. You know," he said. "Famous, brave, connected. If I had you in my house, I'd never stop boasting." Harry gave a polite smile, unsure whether to laugh or not. Dumbledore rose, setting down his teacup. "Then it's settled," he said cheerfully. "I shall expect you at the castle on the 1st of September." Slughorn blinked. "I didn't say." "No." Dumbledore interrupted lightly. "But you will." And before Slughorn could protest, he vanished with a loud crack. As they stepped back into the night, Harry couldn't help smiling. "You knew he'd agree," he said. "Of course," Dumbledore replied, with a twinkle. "Oris. Slughorn has a weakness for fame, comfort, and the occasional bottle of crystallized pineapple. Offer him those, and he'll follow willingly." They began walking back down the lane, the stars bright above them. "Sir," Harry asked quietly, "why do you want him at Hogwarts?" Dumbledore was silent for a while before he answered. "Because, Harry, Horace Slughorn once taught Tom Riddle. And there are memories I must recover from him. Memories that may tell us how Voldemort defied death." Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Defied death. Dumbledore nodded gravely. "Yes. And if we are to stop him, We must first understand how he achieved it. They reached the end of the lane, and Dumbledore stopped, looking up at the stars. The world is changing, Harry. Even the safest places are no longer safe. But remember, you are not alone. He placed a hand on Harry's shoulder, his eyes soft but steady. Courage will be our light, as it has always been. Then he raised his wand, and the familiar twisting pull of apparition swallowed them both, leaving only the whisper of wind through the grass and the faint shimmer of starlight over the empty road where they had stood. The summer air was thick, heavy. Harry stood with Dumbledore outside the grass, comforting outline of the burrow. Cross. The Weasleys' home, glowing warmly against the night, like a beacon of safety in a world that seemed to be growing darker by the day. And for a moment, he felt an ache of relief just to see it again. The soft hum of laughter. Inside, the smell of something delicious, wafting through an open window, and the faint flicker of firelight that seemed to promise that, at least here, all was still well. Dumbledore raised his hand and knocked lightly on the door, though it barely needed the effort. Within seconds, it swung open to reveal a blur of red hair and a shout of joy as Mrs. Weasley threw her arms around Harry, crushing him against her apron. "Harry, dear!" "Oh, it's so good to see you." "And Professor Dumbledore, what a surprise!" she exclaimed, pulling them both inside. The warmth hit Harry instantly. The smell of bread, wood smoke, and polish on the worn furniture. The cluttered but welcoming chaos that defined every inch of the burrow. "It's wonderful to see you, Molly," Dumbledore said kindly, his eyes glinting. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion." "Mind? Of course not! You're always welcome here," she said, bustling about to fetch tea, and insisting Harry sit down before he even had time to remove his cloak. "Ron's upstairs, dear, and Ginny too. They'll be down any moment." Harry barely had time to open his mouth before a loud clatter erupted from the stairs and Ron came bounding into the room, followed closely by Ginny. Ron shouted, grinning widely. "You're here! Finally!" Ginny smiled, her brown eyes bright in the firelight. "You could have written more," she teased lightly. "Sorry," Harry said, smiling back. "It's been, well, strange." "Strange," Ron repeated with a snort. "That's one word for it." Dumbledore accepted a cup of tea from Mrs. Weasley and sank into one of the overstuffed chairs. "I'm afraid I can't stay long," he said. "I merely wish to drop Harry off before attending to some business of my own. But, Molly, there is something I must tell you privately before I go. Mrs. Weasley's expression changed instantly, her smile faltering. She nodded, ushering him into the sitting room, while the others pretended not to listen. Harry caught fragments of their low voices. Words like safe house, protection, and order, headquarters. And though he tried not to voices, his stomach tightened with a familiar unease. The war was growing, and the burrow, however warm it felt now, was not untouched by it. When Dumbledore and Mrs. Weasley returned, both looked composed but serious. Now, Harry, Dumbledore said gently, you'll stay here until the start of term. You'll be quite safe. And, if I may say, quite well fed. His eyes twinkled as Mrs. Weasley smiled faintly again, wiping her hands on her apron. Safe as houses, Professor. You can count on that. Dumbledore nodded, then turned to Harry. I shall see you soon. There is much to discuss, and lessons to begin. But not tonight. He reached out, his hand warm and firm on Harry's shoulder. And then, with a faint pop, he was gone. The silence left behind seemed strange after his presence. Like the air itself had lost some of its brightness. Ron was the first to speak. Blimey, he said. He just disappears, doesn't he? Every time. He's Dumbledore, Ginny said simply, grinning a little. He's allowed. Over the next few days, life at the burrow slipped into a rhythm that felt almost normal, though Harry could sense the tension that lingered beneath every cheerful conversation. Mrs. Weasley was more watchful than ever, jumping at unexpected noises, and Arthur Weasley came home each evening, looking graver, his ministry robes smelling faintly of smoke. The twins, Fred and George, were busier than ever with their shop, sending bursts of enchanted fireworks up from their room as they tested new products. Business is booming, George said proudly one morning, showing Harry a box of pygmy puffs that squeaked adorably when poked. Fear is good for sales, apparently. Fred nodded. People pay anything for a decent shield charm these days. Mrs. Weasley glared at them. You should be ashamed. Profiting off fear. But Harry saw the quick flicker of relief in her eyes. At least they were safe, and doing something they loved. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Harry and Ron sat by the garden wall, watching gnomes scurry through. The air smelled of honeysuckle and smoke. Ron said, tossing a stone toward the pond. What was it like, going off with Dumbledore? Harry hesitated, Strange. We visited someone, a professor. He's coming back to teach at Hogwarts. Slughorn. Ron frowned. Never heard of him. He used to teach your parents, Harry said. Dumbledore wants him back for some reason. He didn't say why. He never says why. Ron muttered. He just looks mysterious and leaves you wondering. Harry smiled faintly, but said nothing. He kept thinking of Dumbledore's words about Voldemort. About defying death. Every time he remembered them, a chill ran down his spine. That night, the burrow felt peaceful, though the world beyond, it was far from calm. In the quiet of his room, Harry looked out the window, at the orchard, where the moonlight silvered the tall grass. Somewhere, far away, others were fighting, dying, or hiding, and though the house around him was filled with laughter, he couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was temporary, fragile as glass. Downstairs, he heard laughter. Fred and George telling stories. Ginny's light giggle. Mrs. Weasley scolding gently as Arthur asked about her clock. The one that showed not hours, but the locations of each family member. He wondered what it felt like for her, watching the hands hover between home and mortal peril. He thought of Sirius, gone, and the ache of that loss came back fresh, sharp as ever. Dumbledore had promised him that love, the bonds between people, were his greatest strength. But at times like this, love also hurt more than anything else. In the days that followed, visitors came and went. Lupin appeared one afternoon, tired but smiling, his robes travel-stained. Tonks came too. Her hair faded from bright pink to a dull brown. Her usual sparkle dimmed. "You all right?" Harry asked quietly, when he found her alone in the garden. She gave him a small, distracted smile. "Just tired," she said, though her eyes looked haunted. "We're all tired these days." Before he could ask more, she excused herself, vanishing into the house. The last night of August arrived faster than any of them expected. The burrow was alive with noise. Trunks being packed. Owls hooting, Ginny teasing. Ron for losing his prefect badge again. Harry stood by the window one final time, watching the lanterns flicker across the fields, thinking of the year ahead. Hogwarts had always been a place of safety and wonder, but now it would be something else. A fortress, perhaps, or a battlefield. He didn't know what Dumbledore planned to teach him, or what secrets still hid behind Voldemort's return. But he knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. As he turned away from the window and the comforting Chaos of the Weasley home. He felt a quiet determination stir inside him. A resolve that, whatever waited at Hogwarts, he would face it head on. Because the world might be falling into darkness, but as long as he was alive, he would fight to bring back the light. The morning air at the burrow was alive with motion and noise as the first day of September, bright and golden. A new school year, waiting just beyond the horizon, and Harry woke to the sound of clattering. Downstairs, voices calling to one another, and the familiar, comforting chaos that always accompanied the Weasleys. Preparations for Hogwarts. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes, the faint hum of excitement cutting through the haze of sleep. The trunks were ready, the owls restless, and Ron was already half-dressed, searching frantically for his tie. "It was right here last night," he muttered, flinging clothes across the room. "You've been saying that for 10 minutes," Harry said, grinning as he pulled on his own robes. "Maybe it got tired of waiting for you and left." Ron shot him a glare, then brightened as Ginny appeared in the doorway, holding the missing tie aloft. "You two are hopeless," she said, tossing it at him. "Mum says breakfast in 5 minutes, or she's leaving without you." "She wouldn't dare," Ron said weakly. But they both knew. Mrs. Weasley absolutely would. Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with the smell of toast and sausages, and the sounds of overlapping conversations. Fred and George were already there, teasing Ginny about her 5th year. "Better behave, Gin," Fred said. "Wouldn't want to get detention on your first day." "At least I'll be there," she shot back. Unlike some people who left school early to sell fireworks. George grinned. "Prefer the term entrepreneurs." Mrs. Weasley swept into the room with a pot of tea, looking frazzled but determined. "All right, everyone, eat quickly. We've got 10 minutes before we leave. Arthur's waiting outside with the car." Harry sat at the table between Ron and Ginny, trying to soak in every detail. The warmth, the noise, the feeling of family. Knowing that once they reached Hogwarts, everything would change again. The world outside, this kitchen was growing darker, and though no one spoke it aloud, the tension hovered like a ghost in the corners of their laughter. The ride to King's Cross was a blur of chatter and near disasters. The trunk that refused to close. The twins apparating halfway down the drive, just to make Mrs. Weasley shriek. And Arthur muttering cheerfully about Muggle car engines that still fascinated him, even after years of tinkering. You'd think they'd have found a way to make them self-cleaning by now, he mused as he narrowly avoided a lamppost. When they finally reached the station, the platform was crowded and noisy, filled with families saying hurried goodbyes. Mrs. Weasley fussed over each of them in turn, pressing sandwiches into their hands and trying not to cry as she reached Harry last. "Take care of yourself, dear," she said, softly, smoothing his hair, as though he were still 11. "And do listen to Professor Dumbledore." "I will," he promised. "Thank you for everything." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "You're part of this family, Harry. Don't ever forget that." The barrier to platform 9 and 3 quarters loomed ahead. One by one, they vanished through it, emerging into the familiar bustle of the scarlet train, steam curling around the crowd like soft white clouds. Harry felt the familiar thrill that came every year, the sense of stepping into another world, leaving behind the ordinary for the extraordinary. They found an empty compartment halfway down the train, and soon Neville and Luna joined them. Luna's reddish-shaped earrings swinging gently as she smiled dreamily. "I read that the Ministry's been attacked again," Neville said quietly, lowering his voice. "Dade says everyone's on edge." Ron said grimly. "Dade's been working late every night. Even the Aurors." Harry looked out the window as the train began to move, watching the platform slide away, Mrs. Weasley waving, until she disappeared into the smoke. The countryside rushed past in a blur of green and gold, but the air in the compartment felt heavy with the weight of what was to come. They talked for a while about Quidditch, about Slughorn's return, about whether Snape might finally get the defense against the arts job he'd always wanted. But beneath it all lay the quiet, this year would be different. "I still can't believe Sirius is gone," Neville said softly, after a pause. The words hung in the air like a wound reopened. Harry swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me neither." Luna looked up from her magazine, her pale eyes calm. "Has not gone." "Not really," she said. "People we love never truly leave us. They just wait for us to catch up." Her words lingered in the air long after she went back to reading. By the time the train neared Hogsmeade, the sky had turned to soft gray, and a cool wind swept through the open windows. Harry felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. Hogwarts Castle loomed in the distance as they stepped off the train, its towers rising proudly against the darkening sky, torches glowing like stars along the path. First years. This way. Hagrid's booming voice called out, and Harry grinned at the sight of him. Huge and solid, waving cheerfully. "All right, Harry," Hagrid bellowed. "Good to see ye." "You too, Hagrid," Harry called back, as they climbed into the carriages that would take them up to the castle. The thestrals pulling them were visible, now to his eyes, sleek and dark, and strangely beautiful. Ron shuddered. "Still can't get used to those things." "They're not so bad," Luna said, serenely, stroking one as she climbed in. "They just know what you've seen." The carriages rumbled up the winding path, and soon the great doors. Hogwarts stood before them. Inside, the great hall blazed with light, its enchanted ceiling showing a sky full of stars. The long tables shimmered with gold plates, and the sound of hundreds of voices filled the air. Harry felt a rush of belonging. This, at least, hadn't changed. Dumbledore rose to speak, his presence commanding instant silence. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "Another year begins, and with it, our continued unity in times of uncertainty. Let us eat. And remember that light can be found, even in the darkest of nights." The feast began. Laughter and chatter, spilling through the hall, but Harry's gaze lingered on Dumbledore. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that brief glance, Harry sensed again the weight of what lay ahead. Secrets yet to be revealed, lessons that would test him more than any before. When the feast ended, the Gryffindors made their way back to their tower, their laughter echoing through the corridors. The fat lady swung open with a cheerful password, and they filed into the common room, glowing with firelight and warmth. Ron flopped into an armchair. "Here we go again," he said, grinning. Harry smiled faintly, but didn't answer. As the others drifted off to their dormitories, he lingered by the window, staring out at the dark mountains and the faint lights of Hogsmeade in the distance. Somewhere out there, Voldemort was moving his pieces, drawing closer with every day. But here, within the ancient walls of Hogwarts, Harry felt a fragile sense of hope that this place, this year, might still hold the answers he needed. He turned from the window, the firelight glinting in his glasses, and whispered to himself, "Whatever it takes, I'll be ready." The first morning at Hogwarts broke with a chill, mist drifting over the grounds, the lake glimmering silver beneath a pale sky, and Harry awoke to the familiar creaks and murmurs of Gryffindor Tower, Ron's snoring still echoing from the next bed, and the faint rustle of owls delivering The Morning Post. Outside the window. For a brief, sleepy moment, it felt like nothing had changed. The castle alive with its usual magic and warmth. But as soon as Harry's thoughts turned toward the coming lessons, the weight of Dumbledore's mysterious words, and the grim reality of Voldemort's return came flooding back. He dressed quickly, shaking Ron awake, and the two made their way down to the great hall, where the long tables gleamed beneath the enchanted ceiling, the air filled with chatter, laughter, and the flutter of wings. Hermione was already there, her nose buried in the new timetable, and she looked up as they sat down. "We've got Slughorn first," she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. "I can't wait to see what he's like. Bet he's a right old bore." Ron muttered through a mouthful of toast. "Dumbledore's just brought him back because he feels sorry for him." Hermione rolled her eyes, but Harry said nothing. He was still thinking about the strange way Dumbledore had spoken of Slughorn, as if he were a key to something larger, something dangerous. When they entered the dungeon classroom, Harry was startled by how different it felt from Snape's cold, shadowed lair. The walls glowed warmly with candlelight, and instead of the usual scent of smoke and acid, the air smelled faintly of caramel and spices. Slughorn himself stood at the front, a large walrus, mustached man with a wide, genial face and eyes that twinkled like a collector spotting treasure. "My NEWT class," he boomed. "Excellent. Excellent. Welcome, welcome. I see a few familiar faces, and a few I'm particularly pleased to see." His gaze lingered on Harry, and he smiled with obvious satisfaction. "Harry Potter? The chosen one himself?" "A pleasure, my boy." Harry flushed, wishing he could sink into the floor, as the rest of the class turned to stare. Or, "Thanks, Professor," he muttered. But Slughorn was already bustling about, setting cauldrons to bubble, and muttering cheerfully about opportunity and talent. Their first lesson was unlike any potions class Harry had ever experienced. Instead of strict instructions and sneering criticism, Slughorn encouraged creativity, walking among the students and offering gentle advice. On the front table stood several completed potions. One a shimmering golden draught that sent tiny rays of light dancing across the ceiling. Another a thick, inky brew that seemed to swallow the light around it. "Observe," Slughorn said dramatically. "Hair. We have Felix Felicis. Liquid luck. A single drop, and everything you attempt will succeed. Brewed properly, it is a triumph. But beware, Badly made, it is toxic. He smiled slyly. And for today's task, I shall reward the best potion with a small vial of it. A collective murmur of excitement rippled through the room. Harry and Ron shared a cauldron, flipping open their textbooks. Ron groaned as he saw the complexity of the instructions. "We're doomed," he whispered. But as they began, Harry noticed something peculiar. The book he'd grabbed, old and worn, had scrawled notes in the margins, corrections, written in a neat, looping hand. The title page bore faint words. "This book is the property of the Half-Blood Prince." Intrigued, Harry followed the notes, adjusting the temperature as the handwriting suggested, stirring counterclockwise instead of clockwise. The result was astonishing. His potion turned the exact shade described in the textbook, smooth and perfect, while the others fumbled and fumed around him. When Slughorn came to inspect their work, his eyes widened. "Perfect, my boy. Absolutely perfect." 10 points to Gryffindor. And as promised, he handed Harry the tiny bottle of Felix Felicis, golden liquid swirling within. "For you." Ron's jaw dropped. Hermione looked both impressed and suspicious. "Well done, Harry," she said tightly. "But I'd love to see how you managed that." After class, as they walked up the dungeon steps, she finally asked the question, burning in her mind. "Where did you learn those changes? They weren't in the textbook." Harry hesitated, then showed her the cover. This was already written in it. It used to belong to someone called the Half-Blood Prince. Hermione frowned. "The Half-Blood what? Sounds dodgy." Ron laughed. Maybe he was just good at potions. But Hermione didn't look convinced. "You shouldn't trust that book, Harry. You don't know who wrote it. It's just notes," Harry said, pocketing the Felix Felicis. "Nothing dangerous." But a small, secret thrill ran through him. For the first time, he'd felt truly skilled at something that had always eluded him. That evening, the common room buzzed with talk about Slughorn's class. "Is brilliant," said Lavender. Brown dreamily. "So much nicer than Snape." "That's not hard," muttered Seamus Finnegan. Harry sat quietly, fingering the small vial of gold in his pocket, wondering whether luck could really be bottled, and whether he should save it for something greater than exams or Quidditch. Across the room, Hermione sat by the fire, her brow furrowed as she read. When she caught him looking, she said softly, "Be careful, Harry. Not everything that looks helpful is." He nodded, but his curiosity about the mysterious prince only deepened. Later that night, Dumbledore summoned him to his office. The room glowed softly with the light of dozens of silver instruments, whirring and spinning. "Good evening, Harry," Dumbledore said kindly, motioning for him to sit. "I trust your first day was enlightening." "Yes, sir," Harry said. "Professor Slughorn seems interesting." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. "Indeed he is. And, as you may recall, I have high hopes for what you might learn from him. He has a certain collection of memories I need." "Memories?" Harry repeated. "Yes." Dumbledore said quietly. "Memories concerning Tom Riddle." The name sent a chill through the room. "Your task, Harry, is to persuade Professor Slughorn to share with me a particular memory, one he has been too ashamed to reveal." Harry frowned. Why would he be ashamed? "Because," Dumbledore said softly, "he told Voldemort something he should not have." The words sank into Harry like stones, and for a long moment, he could only stare. "You want me to get that memory?" Dumbledore nodded. "In time. For now, learn from him. Earn his trust. He likes to surround himself with those he deems special. And I believe you fit that description quite well." He smiled faintly. "Now, my boy, it is late. Rest well. We have much to do this year." As Harry left the office, his thoughts churned. Voldemort, Tom Riddle the Half, blood prints. All the threads seemed tangled together, part of some vast puzzle Dumbledore was slowly teaching him to solve. In the common room, the fire had burned low, and the castle was quiet. He sat by the dying embers for a long while, turning the old potions book in his hands. The inked handwriting seemed to whisper secrets to him, the past reaching out through the pages. Finally, he slipped it into his bag and climbed the stairs to bed. As he drifted into sleep, the last thought that flickered through his mind was that somewhere within that book, and within the lessons Dumbledore had begun, lay the key to defeating Voldemort once and for all, and that the path ahead would test him in ways he had never imagined. The days that followed settled into a rhythm, both familiar and strange, as life at Hogwarts began again with the hum of lessons, laughter in the corridors, and the constant undercurrent of unease that hung over the school like a faint shadow, reminding everyone that outside these enchanted walls, the world was unraveling. Yet inside, Harry found a peculiar comfort in the routine. Early mornings, the smell of parchment and ink, and even the long hours of homework that filled the common room. Each night. What set this year apart, however, were the secret lessons Dumbledore had promised him. The ones that went beyond ordinary magic and into the heart of something darker and deeper. When the summons finally came, in the form of a note, slipped under his plate at breakfast, Harry felt a shiver of anticipation. It was written in Dumbledore's elegant script. Tonight. My office. 8 o'clock. Bring nothing but an open mind. The rest of the day dragged by in slow motion. Classes blurring together, as Harry's mind kept wandering back to what awaited him that evening. Hermione noticed his distraction and sighed. Honestly, Harry, you're worse than Ron before a Quidditch match. What's so important tonight? Just Dumbledore stuff, Harry said vaguely, though he could feel her curiosity burning. When the clock in the common room chimed 8, Harry made his way through the quiet corridors, his footsteps echoing faintly on the stone floors. The castle seemed alive at night. Portraits whispering, candles flickering as he passed, and the distant hum of unseen magic. He reached the stone gargoyle, guarding the headmaster's office. Acid pops, he said, remembering the password. And the spiral staircase began to move, carrying him upward toward the great oaken door. Inside, the office glowed with warm lamplight. The shelves, lined with delicate instruments and curious trinkets, that whirred softly. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, his half-moon spectacles perched low on his nose, the pensieve shimmering beside him like liquid starlight. Good evening, Harry, he said with a smile. I trust you are ready for your first lesson. Yes, sir, Harry replied, though his stomach twisted with nerves. Dumbledore gestured to the chair opposite him. Excellent. Tonight, we shall take our first step into understanding the boy who became Lord Voldemort. He drew his wand and touched it to a small glass vial on the desk. Silvery strands of memory swirled within it. This, Dumbledore said softly, is Professor Slughorn's memory of Tom Riddle's time at Hogwarts. Or rather, the edited version he has allowed me to see. It is incomplete. He poured the contents into the pensieve, and the surface shimmered like moonlight on water. Closely together they leaned in, and the world around them dissolved. Suddenly, Harry stood in a different room. A cozy office, lit by firelight. Slughorn younger, but still plump. Surrounded by students, laughing and eating sweets. Among them sat Tom Riddle. His face handsome and polite. Eyes dark, but gleaming with quiet intensity. Sir, Riddle was saying, his tone respectful, yet probing. I was wondering about something I read. It said, that certain magic can keep a person from dying by splitting their soul. Slughorn's jovial expression faltered. "My dear boy," he said quickly, "that's dangerous talk. Very dark magic. We shall speak no more of it." The room flickered. The memory blurred. And the scene ended abruptly, like a film torn from its reel. Harry was yanked back into the present, heart pounding. "I cut it," Dumbledore said gravely. He altered his own memory to hide the truth. Harry frowned. So he did tell Voldemort something. But what? Dumbledore's expression was unreadable. "That, Harry, is the question you must answer. Slughorn holds the missing piece. And until we retrieve it, we cannot know how Voldemort made himself what he is." "You mean, how he became immortal?" Harry said quietly. Dumbledore nodded. "Yes. There are ways, terrible, forbidden ways, to anchor one's soul to the world. But to do so requires murder. I suspect Voldemort did not stop at one." Harry felt cold all over. "So that's what he did. Split his soul." "More than once," Dumbledore said. "That is my belief. Such objects are called Horcruxes. Each one contains a fragment of a soul. And while even one is monstrous, I fear there may be several. It is why he cannot die. Harry, to destroy him, every Horcrux must be found and destroyed." Harry sat in stunned silence, the enormity of it pressing down on him. Voldemort hadn't just cheated death. He'd mutilated his very soul. And you think Slughorn knows how many? He asked finally. "I think he knows that it was done," Dumbledore said softly. "He was there when the seed of the idea was planted. But his guilt keeps him silent. That is where you come in." The room fell quiet, except for the faint ticking of one of Dumbledore's instruments. "Why me?" Harry asked at last. "Because Slughorn likes you," Dumbledore replied simply. "He collects people. Talented, famous, useful people. To him, you are all three. Gain his trust. Make him proud to call you one of his own, and he may yet reveal what he hides." Harry nodded slowly. "I'll try." Dumbledore smiled faintly. "That is all I ask. Now, there is one more memory I wish to show you. Not of Slughorn's, but of mine." He raised his wand again, and another silvery thread flowed into the pensieve. This time the scene that unfolded was grim and gray. A rundown orphanage, rain slashing against the windows. A young woman, with sharp eyes, stood by the door, ushering in a younger Dumbledore, his auburn beard still short and his face lined with care. "He's an odd boy," the matron was saying. "Tom Riddle. He frightens the other children," Strange things happen around him. Animals die. Objects move. That sort of thing. They entered a small room, where a thin, pale boy sat on a bed, his dark eyes cold and watchful. "I'm Professor Dumbledore," he said gently. "I've come to tell you that you are a wizard." The boy's lips curved slightly, but his eyes stayed hard. "I always knew I was different," he said quietly. "I can make things happen. Bad things. To people who annoy me." Even as a child, there was something unnerving about him. Too calm. Too self-assured. Too aware of his own power. The memory faded, and Dumbledore's voice echoed softly in the dark. He was already lost. Harry. Even then, power fascinated him, and he despised the weakness of others. He saw kindness as a lie. The office came back into focus, the fire burning low in the grate. "I tell you this," Dumbledore said, "not to fill you with fear, but understanding. To fight your enemy, you must know him. Not just his power, but his past, his choices, and the cracks within his soul." Harry felt both awed and unsettled. "So we're looking for pieces of his soul?" he asked. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "And you have already encountered one. The diary you destroyed in your second year. That was a Horcrux." Harry's breath caught. The memory of the ink, the serpent, the whispering voice came rushing back. "Then there could be more," he said slowly. "There are more," Dumbledore replied. "And it will fall to us to find them. But for now, patience. Learn what you can. Watch. Listen. And when the time comes, I will need your courage more than ever." As Harry left the office, the corridors were silent but for the faint hum of magic that lived within the walls. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower, his mind racing with everything he'd seen. The young Tom Riddle, the twisted brilliance in his eyes, and the dark truth of what Voldemort had done to himself. When he reached his dormitory, the castle lay quiet, under a sky full of stars. He climbed into bed, but found no rest. His thoughts circling endlessly around one chilling certainty that to destroy Voldemort, he would have to face not just the darkest magic the world had ever known, but the very depths of what made a soul whole or broken. The next morning dawned gray and cold, a veil of mist curling low across the castle grounds. And though Hogwarts bustled with its usual noise and life, Harry felt changed, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis after what Dumbledore had revealed the night before. Sleep had come only in fragments, haunted by images of Tom Riddle's face. That unsettling blend of charm and cruelty, and the terrible, word that echoed in his mind again and again. Even now, sitting in the great hall with a steaming cup of pumpkin juice before him, Harry could hardly believe the enormity of what he had learned. Across from him, Ron was wolfing down sausages, oblivious to the turmoil spinning behind Harry's eyes, while Hermione kept glancing between her two friends and a folded copy of the Daily Prophet that lay by her plate. "More disappearances," she said quietly. "Two Muggle borns from London and a ministry official's family. They think it's connected to you know who." Ron groaned. "They think everything's connected to him." But Harry said nothing. He couldn't shake the thought that they were all right. That every vanishing, every whisper of fear was another thread in the web Voldemort was spinning tighter around the world. He remembered Dumbledore's calm voice, the gleam in his eyes when he spoke of the soul, and how cold his hands had felt when he'd said, "You have already destroyed one Horcrux." As the day went on, lessons came and went in a blur. Defense against the dark arts, now under Snape's control, was every bit as unpleasant as Harry had imagined. Snape swept through the classroom with his usual air of disdain, his black robes billowing like smoke. "Nonverbal spells," he drawled. "A crucial skill, though I imagine some of you will struggle to comprehend the concept of silence." His gaze lingered on Harry, sharp and mocking. They spent the lesson trying and failing to cast simple jinxes without speaking. Hermione managed it first, her wand flicking with practiced precision. "Excellent, Miss Granger," Snape said, his tone icy. 5 points to Gryffindor. "Mr. Weasley, perhaps you might attempt not to drool on your wand." Laughter rippled through the room. Ron turned red. Harry clenched his jaw, focusing hard on his wand. But the harder he tried, the worse his spell failed. "Pathetic," Snape murmured, leaning close. "Your father was better at this than you, Potter." "Barely." The words hit harder than Harry expected. And when the bell rang, he stormed out, his frustration simmering like fire in his veins. Hermione caught up to him on the stairs. "Harry, don't let him get to you," she said softly. "He's just trying to provoke you." "Well, it's working," Harry muttered. Ron jogged beside them, scowling. "I swear one day I'm going to hex him." Hermione gave him a look. "That would end well, wouldn't it?" But her voice lacked its usual firmness. Even she seemed rattled. They reached the common room, where the golden light of evening streamed through the windows. The chatter of students and the crackle of the fire filled the space. But Harry's mind was elsewhere, on the hidden task Dumbledore had given him, and the impossible question of how to get Slughorn to talk. Later that night, Harry sat alone near the fire. The old potions textbook open in his lap, tracing the elegant handwriting of the Half-Blood Prince. The notes were clever, brilliant, even, and every time he followed one, his work improved. There was something thrilling about it, a sense that he was learning from someone who had rewritten the rules. What? Yet Hermione's warning echoed in his mind. Not everything that looks helpful is. Still, when he looked at the margin, where the prince had scribbled, instead of cut for best infusion, he couldn't help feeling a strange kinship with the unknown writer. It was almost as if the prince were whispering secrets to him from across time. Ron plopped into the chair beside him, yawning. Still at it? You're obsessed. It works, Harry said simply. Every potion, every spell. Whoever this prince was, he knew what he was doing. Ron grinned. Yeah, well, if he helps you pass potions, I'm not complaining. Especially since Slughorn seems to love you. That's the point, Harry said quietly. Dumbledore wants me to get close to him. Ron raised an eyebrow. Why? To get something, Harry replied. A memory. Before Ron could ask more, Hermione appeared, holding a stack of parchment. Honestly, you two are hopeless. You've done none of the Transfiguration homework. That's because we're strategizing, Ron said. Quickly. Top secret mission. Hermione rolled her eyes, but when she saw the Half-Blood Prince's book in Harry's hands, her expression darkened. You're still using that? It's just a book, Hermione, Harry said, his tone sharper than he meant. No, it's not, she said firmly. You don't know who wrote it. For all you know, it could belong to someone dangerous. Dangerous or not, it's helping me, he snapped. Maybe you should try it. Maybe I prefer to rely on my own brain. She shot back, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. Then she turned away, muttering, Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. The next day, Slughorn's class brought a surprise. After dismissing the rest of the students, the professor beamed at Harry. My boy, you must come to supper tonight. A little gathering of friends. Nothing formal, just good company. Harry hesitated but nodded. He knew this was what Dumbledore wanted. A chance to gain Slughorn's trust. That evening, he found himself in Slughorn's office, the air heavy with the scent of crystallized pineapple and brandy. The walls gleamed with photos of famous witches and wizards, all smiling proudly. Slughorn's prized collection. Harry? Slughorn said, pouring himself a drink. You're just in time. Sit down! Sit down! Now tell me, how's dear Dumbledore treating you? Still keeping his secrets? He's Dumbledore, Harry said vaguely. Slughorn chuckled. Yes, indeed. A marvelous man. But you, my boy, you have potential. Why, you remind me of your mother. She was one of my favorites. A truly gifted witch. Charming. Clever, brave. The warmth in his voice, when he spoke of Lily Potter, caught Harry off guard. You knew her well? Harry asked. Of course I did, Slughorn said fondly. A remarkable student. I was devastated by what happened to her. Such a waste. He sighed heavily, his jovial expression flickering. For a moment, Harry thought he saw something else. Guilt, maybe. Before, Slughorn quickly refilled his glass. Anyway, enough of such dark talk. You must tell me about Quidditch, Still Seeker. As the evening wore on, Harry laughed and nodded. At all. The right moments. But his mind raced beneath the surface. He could sense Slughorn's wariness whenever conversation drifted too close to the past. Each time, Harry mentioned Voldemort. Or rather, Tom Riddle. The professor's smile grew forced. His words clipped. Whatever he was hiding, it haunted him. When Harry finally left, the corridors were empty, and the flicker of torchlight danced across the stone walls like restless ghosts. He walked back to Gryffindor Tower, deep in thought. The sound of Slughorn's laughter still echoing faintly in his ears. That night, sleep eluded him again. The faces of Dumbledore, Slughorn, and young Tom Riddle blurred together in his mind, weaving into a tapestry of secrets and shadows. He thought of his parents, of his mother's courage, of her connection to Slughorn, and the way Voldemort had taken everything from her. It struck him then that the past was not just history, it was a map. One that Dumbledore was slowly teaching him to read. If he could trace Voldemort's path back far enough, if he could find each Horcrux and destroy it, maybe the future could still be changed. The thought was both terrifying and electrifying. As the moonlight spilled through the dormitory window, casting silver light across his bed, Harry whispered into the stillness. I'll find them. I'll finish this. And though the castle slept around him, the wind that swept through the tower seemed to whisper back, as if the stones themselves had heard his vow. The morning after Slughorn's party, dawned clear, but cool, the sunlight spilling across the castle like molten gold. Yet Harry awoke with a weight pressing against his chest that no warmth could lift. The memory of Slughorn's laughter, the evasive glimmer in his eyes when Harry had mentioned Tom Riddle had followed him into his dreams. And now, as he sat at the edge of his bed, pulling on his robes, he felt a strange mixture of curiosity and unease swirling within him. Down in the great hall, the air buzzed with the chatter of students, the clinking of goblets, and the flutter of owl wings. But Harry barely tasted his toast. Ron, already halfway through his eggs, glanced at him and said, "You look like you swallowed a bludger. What's wrong?" Harry shrugged. "Just thinking about Slughorn." Hermione, who was reading the Daily Prophet with a furrowed brow, looked up sharply. "You did go to his little club, didn't you?" "What did he say?" Harry hesitated, remembering the warmth in Slughorn's voice when he'd spoken of Lily Potter, the way it had softened when her name passed his lips. "He talked about my mum," Harry said finally. Said she was one of his favorites. Hermione's expression softened for a moment, but then her eyes narrowed. "And did he mention Tom Riddle?" Harry nodded. Sort of. But he dodged it, like he didn't want to remember. She exhaled slowly, closing the paper. "Dumbledore wants that memory for a reason, Harry. Slughorn's hiding something. Something about Voldemort." Ron made a face at the name, but Harry hardly noticed. He was staring into his goblet, watching the pumpkin juice ripple as though it might reveal the truth. Later that day, in the corridor outside Charms, Draco Malfoy brushed past them, his expression tight and pale. His eyes flicked toward Harry, just for a second, cold and calculating, before disappearing into the crowd of students. Ron muttered, "He's up to something. I can feel it." Hermione rolled her eyes, though even she looked uneasy. "You've been saying that since the train ride. Maybe he's just trying to prove after his father got arrested." "Yeah. Or maybe he's joined the Death Eaters." Ron shot back. Harry said nothing, but his gut twisted. The image of Malfoy sneaking around Borgin and Burke's on that rainy day in Diagon Alley haunted him still. The way he'd whispered to Borgin, the glimpse of fear behind his arrogance. As the days passed, Harry found himself watching Draco more closely, noticing how he slipped away after meals, how he seemed thinner, more drawn, like someone carrying a secret that was eating him from the inside out. But whenever Harry mentioned it to Hermione, She dismissed it with a sigh. You're imagining things. You've got enough to worry about, without chasing shadows. Yet deep down, Harry was sure he wasn't wrong. The weeks rolled on, and lessons grew heavier, darker. Snape's defense against the dark arts classes now focused on hex resistance and counter curse reflexes, and though Harry hated every minute of Snape's sneering presence, he couldn't deny that the material was useful. One afternoon, Snape demonstrated the shield charm with effortless precision, his wand slicing through the air. Your shield must be instinctive, he said coldly. Your words, your wand movement, your mind, all one. His black eyes flicked toward Harry. Potter, perhaps you would like to demonstrate your coordination. Harry stepped forward, wand raised, heart pounding. Snape smirked. Expelliarmus. The force of the spell sent Harry's wand flying. Laughter rippled through the class. Pathetic, Snape murmured. Perhaps you should stick to Quidditch. Fury burned in Harry's veins, but he clenched his fists and said nothing. Later, as they left the classroom, Hermione tried to comfort him, but Harry barely heard her. All he could think about was how much Snape hated him, and how Dumbledore still trusted that man completely. That evening, as twilight fell, Harry found himself wandering the castle alone, his footsteps echoing softly in the empty corridors. The portraits watched him curiously, whispering to one another as he passed. He ended up in the astronomy tower, where the cold wind carried the scent of pine and snow. He stood there for a long time, staring out at the darkening forest, wondering how many secrets lay hidden in its shadows. The thought of Horcruxes returned to him. The terrible magic that required splitting one's soul. And he shivered, not from the cold, but from the enormity of it all. How many had Voldemort made? How could anyone destroy something so evil? He didn't know, but he swore he would find out. Somewhere in the distance, the faint chime of the clock tower marked the passing of another hour. Down in the common room, Ron and Hermione were waiting. The firelight flickered across their faces as they worked on homework. Parchment scattered everywhere. You've been gone ages, Ron said. Where'd you go? Just walking, Harry replied, dropping into a chair. Hermione glanced up, her expression softening. You're thinking about what Dumbledore said, aren't you? Harry nodded slowly. I just don't understand why Slughorn's hiding that memory. He acts like it's nothing, but it has to matter. Hermione bit her lip. Maybe it's shame. Maybe he told Riddle something he regrets. Ron frowned. Like what? Hermione hesitated. Something about how to make a Horcrux. Maybe. The word sent a chill through the air. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter. Harry's jaw tightened. Then I need that memory. Dumbledore's counting on me. A few days later, Harry's chance came unexpectedly. Slughorn caught him in the corridor and invited him to another gathering. Smaller. This time, just a few of my favorites. Harry agreed, though his stomach twisted with nerves. That night, as he entered Slughorn's office, the smell of sweet mead and caramelized fruit filled the air. The professor beamed at him. Harry, boy, you must try these crystallized pineapples. A favorite of your mother's. Harry forced a smile, taking a seat among a few other students. Cormac McLaggen, Blaise Zabini, and a Ravenclaw girl whose name he couldn't recall. They laughed and chatted while Slughorn regaled them with stories about famous ex-students. But Harry's mind was elsewhere. When the others finally drifted off, he stayed behind, pretending to help clean up. Professor, he began hesitantly. You said my mum was one of your favorites. Slughorn smiled wistfully. She was bright as a star. That one. Did you ever teach Tom Riddle? The name made Slughorn's expression freeze. Yes. He said slowly, pouring himself another drink. Brilliant boy. Brilliant. Ambitious. Harry leaned forward. What was he like? Dumbledore says he was charming. Slughorn shifted uncomfortably. Yes, very much so. But it's late, my boy. Best get some sleep. He stood, clearly eager to end the conversation. Harry opened his mouth to press further, but Slughorn's face had hardened. Good night, Harry. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Harry standing in the corridor, heart pounding with frustration. He walked back through the dark hallways, the castle silent, except for the whisper of his own footsteps. The moonlight streamed through high windows, casting long silver shadows on the stone. Somewhere, a clock chimed midnight. Harry stopped, leaning against the wall, thinking of his mother, of the man who had murdered her, and of the old professor who held a secret that could change everything. He clenched his fists. He would get that memory, one way or another. The castle around him felt alive with quiet breath, as if listening to his vow. Outside, the wind howled over the black lake, carrying with it the faint echo of something ancient and dark. A promise of battles still to come.